Have you ever stopped to wonder what would actually happen if two nuclear-armed nations, who have spent 70 years aiming artillery at each other, across the highest mountains on Earth, suddenly shifted their crosshairs to the open ocean? If you didn't already know, when we talk about India and Pakistan, almost every single war game and history book focuses on the exact same place, the Himalayas. Thousands of soldiers freezing on glaciers, fighting over rock and ice that barely show up on a map. We have been trained to look at the mountains whenever tensions flare up. But the real answer to how this conflict could explode might surprise you more than you'd expect. So let's dig into this together. Think about what fighting in the mountains actually means for a second. Up there, a war is just a frozen, grinding standoff. It's restricted by extreme weather and gravity. You simply can't march 1,000,000 men across a jagged peak. So the two armies just sit there, dug into bunkers, waiting for a massive breakthrough that both sides secretly know is never going to come. That's the war everyone expects. But generals don't win wars by attacking where the enemy is strongest. They look for the soft underbelly. They look for the place where a single calculated strike doesn't just kill soldiers, but physically stops a whole country from functioning. If you want to choke a modern nation to death, you don't fight them in the snow. You cut off their oil. And you can't do that in the mountains. You have to go south, to the Arabian Sea. This is the massive stretch of water sitting directly below both countries, connecting them to the Middle East and the rest of the global economy. Every single day, an invisible conveyor belt of commercial ships flows through this water. Huge oil tankers and cargo ships moving millions of tons of fuel peacefully toward the ports of Mumbai and Karachi. If you look at the numbers, it gets terrifying fast. Over 80% of India's oil comes by sea. For Pakistan, that number is even higher. Their entire economies, the power grids keeping the lights on in their cities, the fuel keeping their tanks running, all of it relies entirely on a steady line of slow, defenseless merchant ships crawling across the ocean. That's a vulnerability you can't fix with 1,000,000 soldiers. Neither side likes to talk about it on television, but the military planners know the truth. If a crisis ever breaks out over a border skirmish, the tanks might roll forward, and the fighter jets might scramble. That's the performance. But the war that actually decides if either country can survive the month will be fought out of sight, in the deep water. It's the one arena where all the traditional rules of this decades-long rivalry simply stop working. On land, India has a massive advantage in sheer numbers. Pakistan knows this perfectly well, which is why they built a land strategy around just holding the line and making any Indian advance too bloody to justify. But the ocean doesn't have trenches. You can't dig in behind a mountain and wait. At sea, there are no concrete walls or high ground. There's just thousands of miles of flat water, hiding billions of dollars of military hardware. In that environment, a smaller force doesn't have to beat a larger force in a fair fight. They just have to be willing to do the one thing the other side assumes they'd never actually try. So what happens when the land border locks up? The panic sets in, and one side realizes they don't need to defeat the enemy's army if they can just slip beneath the waves and sink the ships keeping the enemy's country alive. To understand how a war in this water actually unfolds, we have to look at what both sides bring to the ocean. And at first glance, it doesn't look like a fair fight at all. India operates one of the most powerful surface navies in the world. When we say surface navy, we mean the ships you can actually see on a satellite image. Destroyers, frigates, and the ultimate status symbol of modern military power, the aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier isn't just a ship. It's a floating city wrapped in steel, carrying fighter jets that can strike hundreds of miles inland. India has two of them. They are designed to show up, sit off a coastline, and tell everyone in the region that the sky now belongs to them. Pakistan doesn't have aircraft carriers. In a pure ship-to-ship gunfight, they know they would lose. But modern navies don't line up and shoot at each other in the open ocean anymore. If you know you can't build a bigger floating city than your rival, you don't even try. Instead, you build something designed specifically to sink that city. You build submarines, and not just any submarines. You build small, extremely quiet, diesel, electric attack submarines. If you're picturing the massive nuclear submarines from the movies, erase that image. Nuclear submarines are incredible because they can stay underwater for months, but their nuclear reactors need water pumps to keep cooling them, and water pumps make noise. Diesel submarines are different. They use diesel engines on the surface to charge massive batteries. Then they dive, turn off the loud engines, and run purely on that battery power. When they are running on batteries, they are essentially silent. They become a hole in the water. Think about what that actually means for the commanders on both sides. Every time an Indian destroyer or carrier leaves port, the captain knows they are a massive, visible target. Their exact location can be tracked by satellites and commercial shipping radar. They have to protect thousands of miles of ocean, guard every incoming oil tanker, and keep their own billion-dollar ships safe. They have to watch everything, all the time. The Pakistani submarine commanders have a completely different job. They don't have to control the ocean. They just have to slip out of their ports, sink down into the dark water of the Arabian Sea, and wait. It is the classic problem of trying to guard a massive fortress with 1,000 windows against an enemy who only needs to break one, and the geography of the Arabian Sea makes this infinitely worse. This isn't a deep, clear, empty ocean. It is a crowded, noisy body of water. You have thousands of commercial cargo ships churning their huge propellers, underwater currents bouncing sound waves around, and temperature layers in the water that can literally bend a sonar signal right over a hiding submarine. Trying to find a silent piece of metal in all that noise is like trying to hear a single footstep at a rock concert. India built a navy to control the surface. Pakistan built a navy to make sure nobody can control the surface. So the board is set. One side has a giant, visible fleet that has to keep the ocean open for trade. The other side has a hidden fleet that only needs a few torpedoes to shut the entire ocean down. But having the tools to sink a ship is very different from actually pulling the trigger. Because the moment the land border locks up and the politicians demand action, those submarines are going to get a terrifying set of new orders. Let's say it starts where it always starts. A border skirmish up north spirals out of control. Artillery shells are flying. Jets are scrambling. And within a week, both armies are completely stuck. They have thrown thousands of men at the mountains, and nobody has moved more than a few miles. But the public on both sides is watching every move. The politicians are demanding a clear victory. That's the most dangerous moment in any modern conflict. When the commanders realize they can't win the fight they are currently fighting, they start looking for a different battlefield. They look at the map, and their eyes drift south to the water. If India can't break the Pakistani army in the snow, they can do something much more devastating. They can turn off the country. Pakistan only holds about 20 to 30 days of emergency fuel reserves. Once that runs out, the entire military machine grinds to a halt. The tanks sit empty. The fighter jets become incredibly expensive lawn ornaments. The power plants feeding the major cities just shut down. India knows this math perfectly well. And because India has that massive fleet of warships, they don't even need to invade the coast to make it happen. They just have to draw an invisible line in the water. They announce a naval blockade. Now, a blockade sounds like a dusty term from a history book, but in modern warfare, it just means India takes its aircraft carriers and destroyers, sails them into the shipping lanes of the Arabian Sea, and tells the world that the ocean is closed. They broadcast a warning that no commercial ships are allowed to approach the port of Karachi. If a foreign oil tanker tries to cross that line, it will be intercepted and turned away. You don't actually need to blow up civilian ships to make a blockade work. You just need to make the global insurance companies too terrified to cover the journey. The moment an Indian carrier group takes up its position and arms its weapons, every commercial ship captain out there is going to look at their radar, see the warships, and turn their slow, unarmed vessel around. Overnight, without a single shot being fired at sea, Pakistan's lifeline is cut. So now, the clock is ticking. The Pakistani military has roughly 3 weeks before their country goes dark. Their own surface ships can't just sail out and challenge the Indian carrier group in a fair fight. If they try, they will be spotted by radar and destroyed by missiles long before they even see the Indian ships on the horizon. The only card Pakistan has left to play is the one India is secretly terrified of: the quiet diesel submarines. Picture the underground bunker where that counter order is given. The naval commanders know exactly what they are asking their submarine crews to do. They are sending a few dozen men inside a cramped steel tube to go hunt a massive fleet that is specifically designed to kill them. The orders aren't about taking territory. They are simple, desperate, and terrifying. Slip under the Indian destroyers. Find the most valuable ship in the fleet. Put a torpedo into it. You have to break the blockade. or the nation starves. This is the exact moment the entire nature of the war changes. It isn't about hundreds of thousands of soldiers anymore. The fate of two nuclear nations suddenly shrinks down to a terrifying game of hide and seek in the pitch-black water. On the surface, the Indian destroyers start pulsing sound waves into the deep, desperately trying to find a battery-powered ghost. And hundreds of feet below the waves, a young sonar operator holding his breath is listening right back. Let's step inside one of those Pakistani diesel submarines for a moment. Forget everything you have seen in Hollywood blockbusters, with their spacious, glowing command centers. A diesel-electric submarine is essentially a pressurized steel pipe packed with explosives, massive batteries, and 40 sweating sailors. The air inside smells like machine oil, unwashed clothing, and ozone. And right now, the air conditioning is turned off, because cooling pumps make noise. Everything that makes a sound is shut down. Picture being the captain of this boat. You are creeping along hundreds of feet underwater, in the absolute dark. You are completely blind. You can't raise a periscope to look around, because an Indian radar plane flying 10,000 feet above the ocean will spot that tiny piece of metal cutting through the waves. Your entire understanding of the world comes down to a young kid sitting in a cramped corner wearing a headset, listening to the ocean through the submarine's exterior microphones. This is how the hunt actually works. The Indian destroyers up on the surface are using active sonar. They are sending massive, booming pulses of sound down into the deep water. It is exactly like walking into a pitch-black room and aggressively sweeping a high-powered flashlight around. They are hoping that sound wave hits the metal hull of the submarine and bounces back. But the submarine crew is using passive sonar. They aren't putting any sound into the water at all. They are just sitting quietly in the dark, watching those invisible flashlight beams sweep past them, listening to the churning propellers of the billion-dollar warships hunting them. The tension in that control room is impossible to fully grasp. The crew knows the brutal math of their situation. The Indian fleet has anti-submarine helicopters dropping listening devices all over the water. They have torpedoes that can drop from the sky. Meanwhile, the submarine is running on a battery that is slowly draining. They can only stay hidden for a few days before they are forced to come up to the surface, turn on their incredibly loud diesel engines, and recharge. Time is entirely on the side of the warships above. If you make a sound, you die. If you miss, you die. If you hit your target, you still probably die. But the captain has his orders. The blockade is choking his country to death. The only way to break it is to sink a major Indian warship and prove to the world that this ocean is a graveyard. Suddenly, the sonar operator hears a distinct acoustic signature, a heavy, fast-spinning propeller cutting through the water above them. It's an Indian destroyer. It is sailing in a straight line, totally unaware that it has just crossed directly over a piece of silent steel. The captain looks at the tracking screen. The angles line up perfectly. This is the exact moment the abstract strategy of a naval war becomes terrifyingly human. To fire a torpedo, you don't just push a quiet button. A modern heavyweight torpedo is a massive weapon, weighing over a ton. Pushing it out of the submarine requires a massive, violent blast of compressed water. It is incredibly loud. The second the captain gives the order to fire, his submarine stops being a ghost. The mechanical roar of the launch will instantly echo through the water. The sonar operators on the Indian destroyers will hear it immediately. All those sweeping flashlights will snap directly onto the submarine's position. The captain stares at the steel bulkhead, knowing that pulling this trigger will likely condemn hundreds of Indian sailors to drown in burning fuel, while simultaneously painting a giant target on his own crew. He gives the order anyway. And the moment that heavy torpedo leaves the tube, the silent waiting game shatters, and the brutal reality of modern naval combat finally breaks loose. The moment that torpedo leaves the tube, the silent game of hide and seek is over, and the conflict immediately turns into a problem of pure, brutal math. We need to talk about what a modern heavyweight torpedo actually is, because it isn't like the ones you see in old World War II movies. A modern torpedo doesn't just ram into the side of a ship and poke a hole in the metal. It is designed to swim completely under the ship, right beneath the center of the hull, and explode. It doesn't even need to touch the ship. The blast creates a massive, temporary vacuum bubble in the water directly underneath the warship. The ship, which weighs thousands of tons, suddenly has absolutely no water holding up its middle section. Gravity takes over, and the ship's own immense weight snaps its steel spine in half. A split second later, the water rushes violently back in, crushing the broken halves together. A single weapon, costing maybe $2 million, can instantly destroy a warship that cost over $1 billion. That is the terrifying contrast at the heart of this entire conflict. The Indian destroyer up on the surface isn't helpless, of course. The moment the sonar operators hear that launch, alarms are screaming across the entire ship. They start firing acoustic decoys into the water, basically loud underwater noisemakers designed to confuse the torpedo's guidance system. The ship cranks its powerful engines to maximum speed, throwing the rudder over hard, desperately trying to get out of the torpedo's path. The crew has maybe 2 minutes to figure out if their $1 million countermeasures will work, or if they are going into the ocean. But think about what this reality means for the commanders running the war. The Indian Navy spent decades building a massive, beautiful surface fleet to protect their sea lanes and project power across the globe. But out here in a shooting war, all of that prestige becomes a massive liability. You are putting hundreds of sailors and an agonizing amount of your national defense budget on the line against a claustrophobic steel tube running on heavy-duty batteries. Let's look at the actual cost of this hunt. To safely track down just one of these diesel submarines, you can't just send one ship. Standard naval tactics require at least 3 or 4 destroyers working together. You need helicopters constantly taking off and dropping sonar buoys into the water. You need specialized airplanes flying in circles overhead. India is suddenly spending hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour just burning aviation fuel and dropping expensive sensors, all to find a single boat that is sitting quietly in the dark, spending absolutely nothing. The math is fundamentally broken. The surface fleet has to be perfectly lucky every single second of the day, successfully dodging every torpedo and avoiding every ambush. The submarine only has to be lucky once. This is the exact trap Pakistan's Navy wants India to walk into. They don't actually need to sink every ship in the Indian fleet to win the Battle of the Arabian Sea. They just need to make the financial and human cost of keeping that blockade going so incredibly high that the commanders back at headquarters start second-guessing every single patrol. They just need to make the water too dangerous to sail in. But fear is just a psychological tool until the moment metal actually breaks. Because if that $2 million torpedo ignores the decoys and finds its target, the shockwave isn't just going to sink a ship. It is going to force both nations into a corner where nobody knows how to stop the chain reaction that follows. When we talk about hunting a submarine, we usually picture a radar screen with a clear green dot blipping in the center. We think of the ocean as a smooth, empty fishbowl where enough technology and enough money can eventually find anything. But the Arabian Sea isn't a fishbowl. It is one of the most chaotic, deafening environments on the planet. Millions of tons of water are constantly churning. You have massive currents dragging across uneven ocean floors, thousands of shrimp and whales making a constant underwater racket. And worst of all, the merchant ships. The Arabian Sea is the highway for the world's oil. At any given moment, there are hundreds of massive tankers dragging propellers the size of 2-story houses through the water. Each one of those propellers is screaming on the underwater microphones. Trying to listen for a single electric battery humming in the middle of all that mechanical screaming is almost impossible. It's like trying to hear someone whispering your name while you're standing next to a jet engine. The ocean doesn't just hide things. It actively lies to you. The biggest lie the ocean tells is about temperature. In this part of the world, the scorching sun heats the top layer of the sea, making it incredibly warm. But a few hundred feet down, the water gets cold very fast. The place where that warm water meets the cold water acts like a physical barrier. It isn't a wall of rock, but to sound waves, it might as well be. When a destroyer on the surface sends a sonar pulse down into the water, that sound hits the cold layer and actually bends. It bounces right off it and shoots back toward the surface. So a Pakistani submarine doesn't even need to run away to hide. It just has to sink below that invisible temperature line and shut off its engines. The sonar from the Indian ships will just bounce right over the top of them. An Indian destroyer could be sailing 1,000 yards away, loaded with all the best technology in the world, and they would see absolutely nothing. India actually has incredible equipment for exactly this problem. They bought some of the most advanced submarine hunting planes ever built. These planes fly low over the waves, dropping tubes into the water that listen for any tiny metallic sound. They are scanning the water day and night. But a battery-powered submarine sitting still doesn't emit heat that a satellite can see. It doesn't send out radio waves you can track. You can't outsmart physics. no matter how much money you spend. Picture being a sonar operator on one of those Indian destroyers. You stare at a green waterfall of static on your screen for 12 hours a day. Every shifting current is a potential torpedo. Every strange echo looks like a threat. The psychological toll of that kind of defense is staggering. You are burning out your best crews, burning thousands of gallons of fuel an hour, chasing ghosts in the dark. And the crews on those destroyers know the terrible truth of their situation. They know that no matter how many helicopters they launch, they will never be 100% sure the water is safe. But the submarine commander sitting in the dark below them, breathing stale air and watching his battery level drop, knows something else. He knows he doesn't actually have to sink an Indian aircraft carrier to win this fight. If you want to break a nation's economy, you don't even need to defeat its military. You just need to show the people driving the oil tankers that no one can protect them. We usually think of naval battles happening in some isolated arena, completely separated from normal life. We picture gray warships shooting at each other while the rest of the world just watches on the news. But the Arabian Sea isn't a vacant lot. It is the main street of the global economy. And the moment the shooting starts between India and Pakistan, the military bubble bursts immediately. Because right in the middle of this high-tech, deadly game of hide-and-seek are thousands of massive, slow-moving civilian cargo ships. These are the oil tankers and container ships that keep the modern world running. They are completely unarmed. They are huge, clumsy, and impossible to hide. And the people driving them aren't soldiers. You can order a military captain to sail their destroyer into a combat zone because that is their job. You can't order a civilian sailor to drive a floating bomb full of crude oil through water where torpedoes are actively being fired. So what actually happens when the Arabian Sea becomes a war zone? The ocean doesn't freeze because of ships sinking. It freezes because of an email. Halfway across the world, sitting in quiet offices in London and New York, are the people who actually control the global shipping industry, the maritime insurance brokers. Every single commercial ship on the ocean carries a massive insurance policy. If a ship sails into a place where there is an active war, the insurance companies instantly activate a war risk premium. They basically tell the ship owners that if they want their ship covered in that water, the price just went up by hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. The moment that first torpedo is fired, or even just when the first serious warning is broadcast by the Indian Navy, those insurance brokers hit send on that email. The rates skyrocket so fast that the shipping companies look at the math and make a very simple, very cold decision. They tell their captains to stop the engines. Imagine looking at a satellite map of the ocean over the next 48 hours. Usually, there is a thick, solid highway of dots moving steadily toward the ports of Mumbai and Karachi. But suddenly, those dots scatter. Tankers carrying millions of barrels of oil drop their anchors near the Middle East, or turn around completely. The shipping companies simply refuse to cross the invisible line into the Arabian Sea. Nobody wants to be the first civilian ship accidentally hit by a weapon designed to snap a billion-dollar warship in half. Within days, the blockade that India tried to enforce against Pakistan becomes a reality for both of them. This is the terrifying boomerang effect of a regional naval war. By trying to choke Pakistan's supply lines, India inevitably chokes its own. The oil stops flowing to both countries. The fuel reserves that run the power grids, keep the hospitals online, and keep the army trucks moving suddenly become the most precious resource on Earth. The massive, beautiful ports on both sides of the border turn into ghost towns. The lights start to flicker, quite literally, across the entire subcontinent. Both militaries realize they have started a clock they don't know how to stop. They thought they were fighting a contained battle out on the water, but they have accidentally built a wall around themselves, and the air inside is rapidly running out. And when two nuclear-armed nations feel like they are suffocating, the decisions they make stop being rational. The longer the ocean stays empty, the closer the panic gets to the people holding the launch keys back on land. So we have to ask the question that everyone in Washington, Beijing, and London is asking, while they watch those empty shipping lanes on their satellite maps. If the ships have stopped moving, and the lights are flickering in the cities, how does this actually end? You'd think that a battle at sea would be easier to contain than a land war. After all, there are no civilians living in the middle of the Arabian Sea. There are no ancient cities to burn or borders to redraw. It's just water. But that's exactly why it's so dangerous. In a land war, there's a certain logic to the violence. You take a hill, you lose a village. You dig a trench, There are physical markers that tell both sides how they're doing. But at sea, everything is invisible until it's a catastrophe. You don't lose a little bit of a destroyer. You either have a billion-dollar warship, or you have 1,000 sailors swimming in shark-infested water while their ship sinks to the bottom. There's no middle ground. And when a country like India or Pakistan loses a major asset like that, they don't just say well played and move on. They feel like they have to hit back twice as hard, just to prove they aren't weak. This is what military planners call the nuclear threshold. And it's a lot more fragile than you might think. If you didn't already know, both of these countries have a very specific set of rules for when they'd consider using their nuclear weapons. They don't just keep them for the end of the world. They keep them as a guarantee that they won't be humiliated or destroyed by a larger conventional force. Pakistan, specifically, has never signed a no first-use agreement. That means they've explicitly told the world that if they feel their national survival is at stake, even if the enemy hasn't used nukes yet, they reserve the right to push the button first. Think about what that actually means for a second. If India's blockade is working too well, if Pakistan's economy is actually collapsing and their military is running out of fuel, the leaders in Islamabad are going to feel backed into a corner. They might decide that the only way to make India back off is to signal that they're ready to go nuclear. They might move their missiles out of storage. They might even prepare a small, tactical nuclear strike at sea, away from any cities, just to show they aren't bluffing. On the flip side, if a Pakistani submarine manages to sink an Indian aircraft carrier and kill 2,000 sailors in a single afternoon, the public pressure on the Indian government to end the threat forever becomes almost impossible to resist. The people in the streets won't be asking for a measured naval response. They'll be demanding blood. The ocean isn't a buffer between these two countries. It's a fuse. Every time a torpedo is fired, every time a depth charge explodes, that fuse burns a little bit faster. We like to think of naval warfare as a clean, professional chess match. But it's actually a high-stakes poker game where both players have a grenade under the table, with the pin already pulled. The moment one side feels like they're losing the hand, they start looking at that pin. It's a terrifying cycle of escalation where neither side can afford to be the first one to blink, because blinking looks like an invitation for the other side to strike even harder. And this is where the rest of the world finally stops being a spectator. Because as long as the fight was just about a few ships in the middle of nowhere, the great powers could afford to sit back and wait. But the second the word nuclear starts being whispered in the command bunkers, the math for everyone else changes. A nuclear exchange in South Asia isn't just a regional tragedy. It's a global extinction event that would trigger a nuclear winter, killing billions through famine. But before the missiles even leave their silos, something else happens. Something that hits you and me a lot faster than a fallout cloud. While the generals are arguing about nuclear triggers, the global market is already reacting to the fact that the world's most important oil route has been turned into a shooting gallery, and that realization is about to crash the global economy in less than 48 hours. Think about how fast the world moves today. We're used to the idea that everything is connected by fiber optic cables and high-speed internet, but the physical world, the world of food, fuel, and raw materials still moves at the speed of a slow cargo ship. If you didn't already know, the Arabian Sea is the heart of that physical network. It's not just a body of water between two rivals. It's a global pressure point. When the first torpedo hits a warship, or the first commercial tanker is caught in the crossfire, the shockwave doesn't stop at the coastline of Mumbai or Karachi. It hits every major city on the planet in less than 48 hours. The first thing that happens is a total freeze of the energy market. Right now, as we're talking, there are millions of barrels of oil sitting in tankers, currently sailing through those waters. The moment the insurance companies pull their coverage, those tankers become floating parking lots. They won't move, and new ones won't take their place. Think about what that actually means for the rest of the world. In London, New York, and Tokyo, the price of a barrel of crude oil doesn't just go up by 5 or 10%. It doubles. It triples. It hits numbers that the world's economy isn't built to handle. The world doesn't care about the border, it cares about the barrel. Every time you fill up your gas tank, you're paying for the answer to this naval standoff. If these two navies keep fighting, the price at your local pump could jump to levels that make driving to work a luxury. But it's not just about gas for your car. Most of the world's electricity comes from natural gas and oil. When the supply gets cut off in the Arabian Sea, the the cost of keeping the lights on in a factory in Germany or a hospital in Brazil starts to skyrocket. This is how a regional war becomes a global depression. The stock market isn't a graph of progress. It's a graph of confidence. And confidence just hit zero. Within 48 hours of the naval battle starting, the major powers of the world, the United States, China, and the European Union, are forced to realize they aren't just spectators anymore. They can't afford to let India and Pakistan figure it out on their own. China, specifically, has invested $62 billion into infrastructure in Pakistan, including the massive port of Gwadar. They need that water to be peaceful so their goods can reach the world. On the other side, the United States and the Middle Eastern oil producers need those sea lanes open to keep the global economy from flatlining. Suddenly, the two nations fighting the war aren't the only ones in the room. They are surrounded by the world's biggest superpowers, all of them, making one thing very clear. This war is too expensive for the rest of us to allow you to finish it. The pressure to stop is immense, but it creates a new, terrifying problem. If you've lost $1 billion ship and 2,000 sailors, and the world tells you that you have to stop fighting before you can get revenge, how do you go home and tell your people that the war is over? This is the hidden trap of modern naval war. You can start it in an afternoon, but the global economy is so fragile that the world will try to shut it down. Before you can even claim a victory, you're left with a shattered fleet, a broken economy, and a public that feels betrayed. You realize that by trying to choke your enemy's trade, you've accidentally bankrupted yourself and lost your seat at the table of global powers. The realization starts to sink in that a win at sea might be the most expensive mistake a country can ever make. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to sink an entire navy to lose the war. You just need to realize that the ocean you were trying to control, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the system that keeps the whole world alive. When the dust finally settles and the international community forces a ceasefire, the two navies will limp back to their ports. There will be victory parades in the streets of whichever city feels it suffered slightly less. The politicians will stand on the decks of their remaining warships and talk about bravery, sacrifice, and the eternal glory of the nation. But if you look past the flags and the speeches, the reality on the ground tells a much darker story. Both countries are now decades behind where they started. Their credit ratings are trashed. Their infrastructure is crumbling because they spent the maintenance budget on torpedoes, and their people are waiting in long lines for basic goods that used to arrive by ship every single day. Think about what that actually means for the future. In the old days, you won a war by taking land and keeping it. You won by destroying the enemy's ability to fight back. But in a modern naval war in the Arabian Sea, you win by realizing the fight shouldn't have happened in the first place. You don't need to sink an entire navy to win a war at sea. You just need to make the other side realize that every ship they lose is a piece of their future they'll never get back. The Indian Navy might still have its carriers, but those carriers are now sitting in ports that can't afford to fuel them. The Pakistani Navy might still have its submarines, but the country they were defending is now economically paralyzed. Both sides played a game where the only way to avoid losing was to refuse to sit down at the table. They realized, too late, that the ocean isn't a battlefield you can conquer. It's a bridge, and when you blow up your own bridge just to stop your neighbor from crossing it, you're the one who ends up stranded. The real lesson here isn't about which missile is faster or which sonar is more sensitive. It's about the fact that in the 21st century, the most powerful weapon isn't a torpedo, it's the ability to keep the world's trust. Once that trust is gone, once the shipping lanes are empty, and the world looks at your corner of the map as a danger zone, you've already lost, no matter how many ships are still floating. We started this by looking at the mountains, thinking the danger was in the snow and the rocks. But we found out the real vulnerability was in the deep, blue water. It's the place where a single mistake can trigger a global collapse. It's the place where the world's two most populous nuclear powers are constantly one bad decision away from a catastrophe that nobody can win. The winner isn't the one with the most ships left. It's the one whose people can still turn on the lights. This is a hypothetical scenario. Real outcomes would depend on factors no model can predict.